Thank you very much, Thomas, for that very warm welcome. And congratulations on your English, which is actually more beautiful than mine because you think about each sentence and pronounce it correctly. Obviously, I've now been put in a very difficult position because I know I'm talking to a largely hostile audience. I came here in the hope that you all had open minds. Perhaps your minds are open even though your conclusions are closed. Let's hope. Thomas just raised the question, which has apparently been discussed here, of what it is to be a European. I gather my friend Fritz Bolkestein has said that he counts himself as a European because he was born in a European Union country. And that is a remarkable definition. I count myself as a European, first of all because I was born in a European country, not a European Union country, because it wasn't part of it then. But much more importantly because I am heir to the Christian faith, the Roman law, and the civilization of Europe, embodied in its institutions, its universities, and above all in its parliaments and its political procedures, which to me is the most important fact of my own upbringing. And I think my country embodies those traditions, those European traditions, as well as any other country in Europe, and has done perhaps more than any other country in Europe to defend them. So, inevitably, therefore, I don't think that whatever it is that makes the people of Britain want to move away from the European Union, whatever it is really a proof that they're not European. On the contrary, I think many British people, certainly of my persuasion, would say that it's precisely our nature as Europeans that makes us move in the direction that we're moving. That we become doubtful about the European Union because it does not represent Europe, does not represent the Europe that we know and love and which made us the civilized things that we are, or at least some of us. So let me just say why I think the British people feel so doubtful about the European Union. And I think there are three big reasons which are not often put into discussion, which perhaps ought to be known by people in this room. The first is the post-war situation. We, the British, had successfully defended our sovereignty against Nazi aggression and had not been occupied. All other nations, save Spain, Portugal and Sweden, which maintained a kind of neutrality, had suffered defeat and or occupation. And this means there's an enormous difference in the underlying psyche of the British people, in particular of my parents' generation, who had fought that war, protected our country, came away from that war with a sense of having achieved what they set out to do, which was to protect our freedom, independence and sovereignty from a major threat to which other countries had succumbed. And I think this means that we start from a different premise, the premise that we have earned our freedom, we've defended our freedom, and in doing so defended Europe, the European values, against the most recent attempt to submerge them, which was the attempt of the Nazis. Of course, then it was the attempt of the communists, which is another question coming later for most of us. So the motives for us, British people, to surrender our sovereignty to a transnational body politic were inevitably different, even if they existed at all. They weren't the same motives as the Germans had or the French had, who had survived occupation and the enmity between them and wanted a new kind of reconciliation. We didn't need that reconciliation because we'd never been forced to have it thrust upon us. So our parents asked the question, was the fight worth it just to give in, just to surrender that thing that we had spent our lives and fortunes on defending? And I think that question has always been in the back of the minds of the British people. There's one reason why they've been sceptical about attempts to take national sovereignty away. So that's the first big reason that the British are sceptical. The second big reason is that our country has enjoyed a different kind of government and a different kind of law from the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe has largely, not all of it, but most of it has undergone the great transformation inflicted upon it by Napoleon, and the imposition upon the nations of Europe of external sovereignty, written constitutions, and the Napoleonic jurisdiction, the Code Napoleon. Your country used to have a beautiful system of law, Roman Dutch law, which survives in the modern world, but only in the places which were part of the British Empire, because they stole them from you. That's to say, Zimbabwe, usually Rhodesia, and South Africa. Forget about that. The fact is that the Netherlands are governed by a Napoleonic-style jurisdiction in which law is imposed upon people from above by the decisions of the legislature and works down into the capillaries of society. In my country, law is not largely, or wasn't largely, imposed from above, but was created in the courts. And indeed, to say that it was created is already to beg an important question. The British people regarded the courts of law, courts of the common law as it's called, as discovering the law. You take your dispute to a judge and the conflict that is really troubling you. You put it before that judge, and if he is impartial and proceeds according to the principles of natural justice, as they're called, then he will discover the legal solution, even if nobody has ever said it before. Parliament then has the business of ratifying this if it comes before Parliament, but much of our law has never come before Parliament. This is an extraordinary fact, that we have built up a legal system from below, from the resolution of the conflicts that occur between ordinary people, and only now and then with the intervention of the legislature imposing laws from above. You can understand this if you contrast the law of product liability in English law with the laws, all the laws and regulations about product liability which have been created by the European Commission and the European Court of Justice. We have one law, which is not even a law, it's a decision of the courts in the case of Donahue against Stevenson, which tells you that somebody who is issuing something for sale in the general public is prima facie liable for all the adverse causes that will, adverse effects that will result from consuming it. That was a decision of the common law courts, and it has been sufficient to generate a fully developed system of product liability without consulting Parliament. Of course, Parliament comes in, but then when there is an additional difficulty, but that particular innovation saved us from all the problems that bothered European states in the interwar period. Right, so that, I think, is a very important point to remember, that our system of law is structurally completely different from those systems of laws applied in Europe, has great difficulty accommodating things like the decisions of the European Court of Justice, and certainly causes feelings of rebellion in the minds of ordinary people when they find themselves subject to a regime of regulation which is vaster by 100-fold than anything that they've been accustomed to. And that, I think, is important because it gives people a sense that somehow we're being governed from outside by people who don't understand us, who only know how to regulate and don't know how to resolve conflicts. Regulations produce as many conflicts as they resolve. The common law only resolves things. But that's the second great feature of my country, which makes it so sceptical towards European Union. But the third feature, I think, is one which is hardly ever mentioned, but is even more important than the other two, which is that we speak the international language. Indeed, we speak it we're so deeply immersed in it that we hardly speak anything else. We are a monoglot, highly ignorant community, which doesn't have any ability to understand anything, any language other than its own. But the language that we speak is the first language that everybody else So anybody who is remotely educated in any part of Europe can move into our country and establish himself or herself in our territory. At the same time, our territory is small, very small. It's much loved too, because we fought for it in 2 world wars, and this was the great propaganda message, that we have this beautiful country which must be saved. And anybody who's travelled in the British countryside knows what I mean. It's much loved and protected by long-standing institutions and initiatives, which I'm going to talk about tomorrow in Amsterdam at a meeting organised by the European Union, interestingly enough. It's a small territory. Our territory is even more densely populated, the territory of England at least, than that of the Netherlands. You wouldn't think so to look at it. So we are effectively under siege due to the European Union's freedom of movement provisions, which bring 500,000 people each year into our tiny country. And those provisions are part of the treaty, deeply embedded in the treaty, almost impossible to change. And they are the things which are most objectionable to the British, who see that they have lost control of their borders and are now hosts to a vast number of people from the former communist countries in Eastern Europe who compete for jobs, of course, and most of all compete for houses and are in effect causing an enormous housing crisis which we don't know how to resolve. So, again, this goes back to the first big reason, the fact that we defended our sovereignty in a time of great emergency. And people ask themselves, how can there be such a thing as national sovereignty if you have lost the right to control your borders? You can't exclude those whom you don't want in the country, or invite or give special privileges to those whom you do. So those 3 great features of my country's position, which are not duplicated elsewhere in Europe, are the real underlying cause as to why British people feel so dissatisfied. You may object to them feeling dissatisfied on these grounds. You may think that this is primitive or in some way involves the kind of nationalistic consciousness from which the rest of the world has released itself. But I think that it probably is not really fair, because these feelings